Well, welcome everybody to this webinar on campus speech in politically charged times. My name is Hank Reichman. I'm a professor emeritus of history at California State University East Bay and former chair of the AAUP's Committee A on Academic Freedom and Tenure, and I'm going to be moderating this conversation. I think the topic couldn't be more timely. On campuses all over the country right now, we're seeing all sorts of controversy over campus speech. At just today in the Chronicle of Higher Education, there's a wonderful op-ed by Silke Maria Weineck, I hope I pronounced her name correctly, at the University of Michigan about an amazingly, I think, rather terrifying proposed disruptive speech policy there. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists, and we can get started. We have with us today Greg Schultz, who is a senior program officer in the AAUP's Department of Academic Freedom, Tenure, and Governance, who will open our activities with a description of some of the campus speech policies that the AAUP has developed over the years. And then we have Amy Offner, who is the president of the AAUP chapter at the University of Pennsylvania, which is one of our active non-union advocacy chapters. And then Katie Roger, who is president of the UCAFT, the union which represents the non-tenure track, or as they call it, their non-Senate faculty, and the academic librarians in the University of California system. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Greg to talk about relevant policies applying to campus speech.
Thank you, Hank, and I'd like to repeat Hank's welcome, everyone. I'm going to try to share my screen here, and we'll see how that works. Are you seeing a slide that says campus speech? Good. So my role today is to talk briefly about how the AAUP's policies on academic freedom apply to campus speech. These 6 AAUP policy documents, all but one from the first section of the Red Book, are among the most relevant to the topic. The most important of these is the 1940 statement, the second one there, which was the product of a multi-year process involving a number of higher ed organizations. It was adopted by the AAUP and what is now the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and has been endorsed by hundreds of scholarly societies and other higher ed organizations. All subsequent AAUP policy documents on academic freedom are based on the 1940 statement. This slide shows a bar graph that maps the influence of the 1940 statement. On the left are various categories of institutions. On the bottom, how they incorporate the 1940 statement into their regulations. Some verbatim with attribution in dark blue, some verbatim without attribution in the red, some verbatim, some paraphrased. Please note that among the institutions surveyed in this report in July of 2020, only about 4% did not incorporate the 1940 statement into their institutional regulations. Note also that more than 50% incorporated the 1940 statement verbatim with attribution. Since most colleges and universities have incorporated the 1940 statement into their regulations in some fashion, its conception of academic freedom has become not only widespread, but authoritative. Nevertheless, the 1940 statement is not the AAUP's last word on academic freedom. It's a concept that the association has continued to develop. As the AAUP understands academic freedom today, it has 4 dimensions. Faculty members have academic freedom in research, in teaching, intramural speech, and extramural speech. Here's what the 1940 statement says about academic freedom in research. Teachers are entitled to full freedom in research and in the publication of the results, subject to the adequate performance of their other academic duties. Obviously, this is not what we're talking about when we talk about campus speech. Furthermore, as the authors of the 1915 Declaration noted, academic freedom in research is almost everywhere so safeguarded that the dangers of its infringement are slight. It may be therefore disregarded in this report. Even in 1915, research is not where faculty members tended to get into trouble. So let's talk about academic freedom in teaching. 3 quotations here, one from the 1940 statement, one from the 1970 interpretive comments on the 1940 statement that the AAUP and the AAC&U did together, and the third quotation from Freedom in the Classroom, which our Committee A on Academic Freedom and Tenure issued in 2007. 1940 statement, teachers are entitled to freedom in the classroom in discussing their subject, but they should be careful not to introduce into their teaching controversial matter that has no relation to their subject. The interpretive comment, the intent of this statement is not to discourage what is controversial. Controversy is at the heart of the free academic inquiry, which the entire statement is designed to foster. This passage serves to underscore the need for teachers to avoid persistently intruding material which has no relation to their subject. Freedom in the classroom, so long as an instructor's allusions provide genuine debate and learning that is germane to the subject matter of a course, they are protected. So these quotations provide an example of one way in which the AAUP's conception of academic freedom in the classroom has developed since 1940. From the 1940 statements warning against introducing irrelevant, controversial material to the 1970 interpretive comments asserting that, quote, controversy is at the heart of free academic inquiry, and acknowledging that teachers just should introduce irrelevant stuff persistently, and freedom in the classrooms affirming that material irrelevant to the subject matter may be introduced as long as it contributes to learning. Our best statement on classroom speech, in my opinion, is freedom in the classroom, which, as I said, AAUP's Committee A on Academic Freedom and Tenure produced in the early 2000s. It responds to the sort of right-wing attacks on academic freedom that we're seeing today. This is a summary paragraph. In sum, contemporary critics of higher education argue that instructors must refrain from stating strong opinions, for doing so would both lack balance and constitute indoctrination. That instructors must not advance propositions germane to a subject if some students with deeply held religious or political beliefs might be offended, for doing so would create a hostile learning environment. And that instructors must abjure allusions to persons or events that advance discussion, but that some students might fail to perceive to be clearly connected to a course description, for doing so would inject irrelevant material into the classroom. Such restrictions would excise freedom in the classroom from the 1940 statement. They would conduce not to learning, but to intellectual sterility. let's talk about academic freedom of intramural speech, literally within the walls. Intramural speech means conduct and speech related to institutional governance, like criticizing the administration or its actions. Interestingly, the 1940 statement does not explicitly address this important dimension of academic freedom, even though many of the cases investigated by the AAUP during its 109 years of existence involve professors fired for their intramural speech. But subsequent documents do, most notably these two, on the relationship of faculty governance to academic freedom in 1994, a product of the Governance Committee, and Protecting an Independent Faculty Voice, Academic Freedom After Garcetti v. Bios, which is a product of Committee on Academic Freedom and Tenure. You'll note that the first quotation is a definition of all the dimensions of academic freedom. The second one there is the one describing intramural speech. The academic freedom of faculty members includes the freedom to express their views on matters having to do with their institution and its policies. The second quotation from Garcetti gives a fuller definition of intramural academic freedom. It pertains to both speech or action taken as part of the institution's governing and decision-making processes, and speech or action that is critical of institutional policies and of those in authority, and takes place outside an institution's formal governance mechanisms. Academic freedom of extramural speech, literally outside the walls. Extramural speech and conduct is speech and conduct exercised by faculty members not in their capacity as faculty members, teachers, researchers, citizens in institutional governance, but in their capacity as citizens. To quote again from On the Relationship of Faculty Governance to Academic Freedom, extramural academic freedom is the freedom to express one's views on issues of public interest generally, and to do so even if one's views are in conflict with one or another received wisdom. So the 1940 statement merely says, college and university teachers are citizens, members of a learned profession, and officers of an educational institution. When they speak or write as citizens, they should be free from institutional censorship or discipline. Oops. Several of the AAUP's most famous case investigations have been of faculty members who have been fired because of their extramural speech or action. One question that often arises is, how protected is extramural speech? And I think the answer is, from an AAUP perspective, pretty darn protected. Under AAUP standards, extramural speech should rarely result in a faculty member's dismissal. The key principle is stated in the Committee A Statement on Extramural Utterances, key passage here. The controlling principle is that a faculty member's expression of opinion as a citizen cannot constitute grounds for dismissal unless it clearly demonstrates the faculty member's unfitness to serve. And extramural utterances rarely bear upon the faculty member's fitness for continuing service. This principle is further elaborated in our recommended institutional regulations and academic freedom and tenure, specifically Regulation 5 on dismissal procedures, which starts out with this. Adequate cause for a dismissal will be related directly and substantially to the fitness of faculty members in their professional capacities as teachers or researchers. The AAUP applied this principle quite dramatically in one of our most famous cases, which was that of Angela Davis at the University of California at Los Angeles. Angela Davis had made some pretty strong extramural statements, including some trashing academic freedom. The investigating committee, however, found that the regents, in firing her for these statements, had violated her academic freedom. And that finding was based on the fact that the regents failed to demonstrate that her extramural speech bore any relationship to her performance as a teacher. This is the finding from the report. The features of the extracurricular speeches to which the regents took exception, and which appear to be the main basis for their unfavorable decision, are features which in most instances were not shown to be violations of AAUP standards of academic responsibility. But most importantly, the regents failed to show that they demonstrated, in the light of the whole record, unfitness for a position on the faculty of the university. Consequently, the unfavorable decision of the regents in reliance on these features of the speeches must be judged to be a violation of Miss Davis's academic freedom. Another question that arises, and reasonably so, is academic freedom the same as First Amendment free speech? I must start with a disclaimer that I'm not an attorney. I should also say that the AAUP has not founded its defense of academic freedom on the law or on legal principles. Our defense of academic freedom is based entirely on academic principles and standards. But I should note here that academic freedom and First Amendment free speech are not the same thing. Also, if you look at that first bullet there, although academic freedom in the United States receives some protection at public universities from the First Amendment, you'll notice that at public universities, First Amendment does not apply at private institutions. Is academic freedom absolute? We have certainly encountered faculty members who seem to believe that their academic freedom is limitless. Under AAUP standards, however, academic freedom does not protect incompetence or violations of standards of professional ethics, among other things. I'm going to quoting here from Arthur O. Lovejoy, one of the founders of the AAUP, writing in 1930, forgive the gendered language, academic freedom is the freedom of the teacher or research worker in higher institutions of learning to investigate and discuss the problems of his science and to express his conclusions, whether through publication or in the instruction of students, without interference from political or ecclesiastical authority or from the administrative officials of the institution in which he is employed, unless his methods are found by qualified bodies of his own profession to be clearly incompetent or contrary to professional ethics. We also issued a FAQ on campus free speech. By we, I mean the AFT and the AAUP. And there's a statement in that FAQ, which the address for the page, the landing page is below. Academic freedom is not unlimited. It can be circumscribed by laws, institutional regulations, as long as they don't impermissibly restrict academic freedom, and most importantly, standards of professional ethics. As many of us are well aware, academic freedom exists in name only if our academic employment is insecure, which is kind of why the AAUP was founded, and also why the AAUP has always linked academic freedom to tenure, which is essentially security of employment provided by academic due process. By academic due process, the AAUP means fair disciplinary procedures in which faculty peers, Lovejoy's qualified bodies of one's own profession, play the determinative role. A tenured faculty member under our standards can be fired only for cause as demonstrated in a hearing before faculty peers with a burden of proof on the administration. What about non-tenured faculty members? Well, the good news is that the AAUP, recognizing that all faculty members should enjoy academic freedom, has formulated due process protections, not just for tenured faculty members, but for all those doing academic work. This footnote from the recommended institutional regulations, which was added in 2018, essentially says that. And I am going to end here, having taken more than my allotment of time, and by thanking you all and noting that if you do have questions about AAUP policy standards or are dealing with problems on your own campus, feel free to seek assistance from our Department of Academic Freedom, Tenure, and Governance at the email address there, academicfreedom@aaup.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Before moving on, I want to point out for the rest of the program, I will be in conversation with Katie and Amy about conditions of their campus, etc. But we will be entertaining questions from participants after our initial conversation. You can put those questions into the Q&A. And I'll try to look through them. And if we haven't addressed them in our conversation, we'll address them more directly in the last 15 or 20 minutes or so of the program. So let me turn first to Katie Roger. And this is appropriate to talk about with Katie in light of what Greg just said about the fact that the AAUP believes that both tenured and non-tenured faculty have the rights to academic freedom, and that we strive to provide as close to the same due process protections for all faculty members, irrespective of their tenure status, although tenure, at least as the AAUP understands it, is the best protection we know of at this point, especially when it's bolstered by a union contract. So let me turn to Katie and ask her what's been going on in the UC system about with issues of campus speech these days, for both the tenured, but also and particularly the contingent faculty that you represent.
Thank you. I can speak mostly to the latter. I myself, I'm a lecturer at UC Davis. I'm a full-time lecturer with continuing status, which is the closest that UC lecturers can get to a form of tenure. It's a permanent contract. So I do enjoy a little bit more security than a lot, if not a majority of lecturers in the UC system have. But I would say that we are seeing a moment now where the academic freedom that we do enjoy and have access to, our contract for lecturers points to the university's own academic freedom policy for our Senate or tenure track faculty, and basically says you get what they get. That's what our contract effectively says. But as you mentioned, it's not the same for contingent faculty. The lack of protection through tenure leaves us wide open in very different ways. So in listening to Greg, what I would point most to that we're seeing increasing cases of would be where extramural speech, when people are out in their lives, doing what they want to do as private citizens, getting essentially pushback, being called out, and in extreme cases, even fully doxxed online for expressing their opinions, not even professing to represent the university or their profession, but even speaking as private citizens. A case we had at UC Berkeley involved a lecturer who attended a city council meeting in the community where they lived. And this was back at the end of 2023, expressed an interest in seeing the city council craft a ceasefire statement. And that was captured on video, as the whole meeting was. Some of their current students saw the video, posted and reposted this faculty member calling for a ceasefire, and then proceeded to go to campus administrators and say that they didn't feel safe in a classroom with this person, whose job and ultimately their contract as a contingent lecturer is based heavily on student evaluations. So even though this person did not, bring any of this into the classroom per se, really felt that the way that really now our world works with things like social media, video content, came into a sort of moment of crisis for them professionally, when it was time for them to go through reappointment. So this is increasingly now the kind of issue that's brought to us as a union representing contingent faculty. And we've even had cases for a handful of librarians in the UC system expressing personal opinions outside of the workplace, and how their union can protect them or not. So we're looking, I will say, with our next contract for lecturers in the UC system, that will be a campaign that we undertake. I mean, we're starting now, but our contract is current through 2026. So we're ultimately looking to find ways to negotiate provisions and language that maybe extend beyond what the current UC academic freedom policies articulate, that really address that contingency. The fact that right now we do feel that part-time especially, but any lecturer without tenure is sort of left out of really experiencing what I think the intent of academic freedom is supposed to provide, especially for faculty. I'll stop there. There are lots of examples I can give, but beyond that, just to answer the first part of your question, I really can't speak to necessarily what individual Senate or tenured UC faculty members are experiencing. I will say that our regents are right now debating a policy. This has been going on now for many months, that would address some of the statements that have been posted on homepages of department websites that are being considered, either political or, unrelated maybe to the subject matter of those academic units. And the regents are taking up now the consideration of a policy that would disallow that kind of content from being posted on department homepages per se. Faculty could still post on their own pages if they wanted to, but so that's being debated heavily right now by the Senate, who feel that that's an infringement on their rights as faculty.
Thank you, Katie. I want to turn now to Amy. Amy, Penn has been at the center of a lot of things going on recently. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about that. And also, I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what's going to be happening nationally on April 17th. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I mean, at Penn, we've just been experiencing a coordinated national assault on academic freedom in every dimension for actually since before October 7th. And it's really important to understand that this started with an attack on the right of faculty to organize academic programming that is completely within their right to do. It started with an attack on the right of faculty to organize the Palestine Rights Literature Festival. And it was organized by donors who had been angry actually at the university for a long time over racial justice measures. They have a broad right-wing agenda, and they used this literature festival as a chance to really mobilize a coordinated assault on the university that's now really targeting every part of the university and every aspect of academic freedom. So we've seen the at the university an enormous attempt by donors and also by the administration to silence research, teaching, and speech on Israel and Palestine. Student groups have been preventing from holding teach-ins and film screenings. Faculty members who teach on these subjects have been subjected to really dangerous campaigns of targeted harassment, death threats, threats to their safety. And then what we've seen is that there have been donors, politicians, and administrators who have created basically used, I think, defamatory depictions of anti-war protest in order to launch efforts to basically tear up the faculty handbook, to give the Board of Trustees powers that belong to the faculty, powers over determining curriculum, powers to destroy DEI and racial justice policies. I think that those are really in the crosshairs right now. And we've seen, for instance, the Republicans in the state legislature attempting to defund the Penn School of Veterinary Medicine. So there's sort of a coming together right now of many groups that have been attacking higher ed for a long time, who are taking their opportunity to really go after the core functions of the university and the core rights of faculty and students to freedom in research, teaching, and learning. I mean, the other thing, though, that's going on our campus is a lot of organizing. And I think that this year has made faculty, both tenure track and non-tenure track, aware, first of all, of what we have in common. I think a lot of tenured faculty thought that attacks on higher education were never going to come for them, and are realizing that actually the forms of insecurity that non-tenure track faculty have always experienced because of precarity are things that we have to worry about too. So we've been seeing more possibilities for cross-rank organizing. The membership in our AAUP chapter has doubled this year. There have also been, in this context, big union victories on our campus. The RAs won their union election this year. The house staff at Penn Medicine unionized. The Penn Museum workers won a contract. And actually, in a couple of weeks, the graduate research and teaching assistants are going to finally have their union election, which they're very clearly going to win. And I think that faculty have come to recognize that we also need to build up our collective power and learn some lessons, I think, from the union organizing that have been happening on our campus. One of the things that we've done over the course of the year is really start talking with other AAUP chapters and higher ed unions around the country. We've been organizing a National Day of Action, which is going to happen on April 17th. And if you haven't heard about it yet, I really hope that you can feel free to reach out to me and get involved. This is designed to bring together mobilizations that have been happening on campuses all around the country that are responding to the long-term defunding and restructuring of higher ed, attacks on many fields of knowledge, whether African-American studies, study of gender and sexuality, Israel and Palestine, attempts to sort of really destroy the ability of students to learn in those areas and the ability of faculty to teach and research, and also responding to attacks on DEI and racial justice measures at universities. And we want to start to build up our capacity to fight back together and to put forward a positive national program predicated on adequate public funding for higher ed to make it affordable and accessible to all people, strong protections for the freedom to teach, learn, and research, racial justice measures, job security and fair pay for everybody at the university, and democratic functioning of institutions, which means strong unions, strong faculty senates, people having a voice in the policies of the universities. So that's sort of what we've been working on. I can say a lot more, but I'll stop there. Hank, I think you're muted.
I thought I was unmuting myself. Now I'm not muted now, right?
You're good.
Okay. So thank you both. I want to ask both of you actually, what do you think is the best way that people can address some of these issues, especially as they don't necessarily impinge on the traditional academic freedom questions of individual faculty members, but in particularly around, I'm thinking of these, we've been seeing around the country, institutions trying to adopt or adopting broad policies governing protest on campus and governing speech, whether people can put signs outside their door, things that, were just customary, always done, and now suddenly being banned. What kind of experience do you have on that, and what kind of advice do either of you, or Greg for that matter, have about how to deal with such policies? I'm thinking of this proposal I mentioned earlier at Michigan, but there have been a number of places where these are happening.
Well, I'll say something to that. One of the things that actually was happening long before this year is that Penn does have a document called the Guidelines on Open Expression, which could be a lot better than they are, but they do offer protections for the right to speak, to assemble, to engage in protest. The university administration has actually violated those for years in repressing student protest. And one of the core problems is that there is no legitimate enforcement mechanism for those guidelines. The university administration itself has the exclusive responsibility for determining when the guidelines have been violated, and then for pursuing some kind of discipline. And effectively, the university has repressed all kinds of activity and protected activity by students and also by faculty for years, with no accountability for that. So one of the things that we think is that actually there needs to be a new elected body within the university that can enforce some of the policies that we already have on the books that should be protecting speech on campus. I think that what's going on, unfortunately, right now is that faculty are basically being told that, well, donors and administrators are going to be rewriting these to eviscerate them, so there won't even be any halfway decent policies on paper. And it's an indication of the really anti-democratic mechanisms and the very secretive and opaque mechanisms by which policy is made at the university, that faculty are basically getting the message that this is going on and there's nothing you can do about it. I think the only solution is to sort of organize and push. I think we need to use these rights. They exist to the extent that we continue to use them and fight for them. And one example, actually, of a group that I think has done a great job on this on campus is a student group. It's a group called Penn Chavurah, and it's a progressive Jewish student group on campus that wanted to hold a film screening of the documentary film Israelism, which presents critical perspectives on Israeli government policy. And they were banned from doing so. And what they did is they went to the press. They announced that they were going to hold a film screening, even though they weren't allowed to do so. They got media coverage. They got a lot of support. They got terrific turnout. They have been able to overcome really threats from the university to punish them. So I think organizing is our strategy.
I just echo what Amy said. My answer to that was going to be quite simply organizing. And I think the kind of collaboration that we're seeing even in an event like this, where we, sort of within higher ed, we need to really see this as a moment for a movement, where we're sort of keeping ourselves accountable to each other, what's happening on individual campuses, and how this plays into a sort of larger movement that needs to happen, where we're able to turn ourselves out, whether it's to respective regents type meetings, to partner with, as Amy said, student groups and other stakeholders on our campuses to ensure that policies don't become eroded or even disappeared right in front of us, that protect us in these ways. I'm really excited. I think that the National Day of Action is such a great step in this direction. I'm hopeful that there'll be more and more opportunities for us to be partnering, across the country, maybe even globally, because really this is what it's going to take. I think I've said this to folks over the last year. I think that in higher ed right now we have to message what we're doing in ways that are going to really engage the media and engage people outside of higher ed, in a way that helps them understand that the stakes for all of us really are for all. I think that we often can be disconnected from a sort of broader public in terms of our messaging around how academic freedom is in fact connected to, whether it's First Amendment rights specifically, but just the kinds of freedoms that I do think that we all want to ensure for ourselves as citizens. And I'm very interested in seeing how the way that we organize through unions and AAUP chapters and these organizations that we affiliate with can really think together about how we can connect ourselves beyond our campus cultures and university and college systems. So I appreciate everything that Amy said, and I would echo it.
Katie, I want to follow up with a question that's in the Q&A. Someone asked, 2 adjunct faculty at CUNY have recently been non-reappointed after posting something pro-Palestine on social media. What is the standard of proof that this was a violation of their academic freedom and or their First Amendment rights? And of course, I know that you're not an expert on CUNY's policies, but what are how best to approach that question? Because I think that's a big issue for so many contingent faculty members, especially people who are in the least protected, even in union contracts, of, can they be just non-renewed just because of their views?
Yeah, I think this is very dependent on whether there's some sort of contract in place, and if so, what that would say. My first question would be the extent to which there's actual documentation that was listed as the cause. I think that what happens often is we may know that this is the reason, but that's not, of course, what the university would say is the reason to not reappoint. If there is actual documentation that this is the reason that these folks are not being renewed, that they that needs to be pursued, because using the language from the policies that Greg shared, I think that this is the kind of thing that's worth fighting, trying to back the case or back the situation with AAUP policy, the university system's own stated policies on academic freedom, and to really force the issue that contingent faculty are faculty and should be recognized and protected equally. If there is a contract in place, and again, there's not an explicit connection to these social media posts as cause, it actually can get more complicated. The contract language surrounding lecturers in the UC system, for example, there are ways in which lecturers can be let go with very little stated cause at different points in the reappointment and career trajectory of a non-tenure track faculty member. There are moments where they can be let go kind of silently. And so if that's the case, it can be a much harder fight. So I would say first and foremost to try to document that is the connection and the reason why these folks are not receiving their reappointments, and to try to really exploit that.
Let me go to another question that's been is in the Q&A, in which there are quite a few questions, and let me apologize in advance. I think it's very likely we will not get to all, perhaps even most of them. But one person asked, one of the ways in which speech has been challenged on campus is the right of student groups or faculty to bring guests to campus who express controversial opinions on the right and the left. This challenge has come from administration, but also from protesters, and in several instances led to the shutting down of these types of events or doxing of faculty who bring these guests to campus. I'm wondering what the speakers think about the overall culture about speech that this leads to. And whoever wants to take it first.
I guess I see this as, at Penn being like of a piece with attempts by the university actually to deny permission to have any event of any kind that has to do with Israel and Palestine, where critical perspectives on the war are presented. And sometimes, that can come in the form of trying to subject invited speakers to scrutiny. It can come in a lot of different forms. So I guess that's not been the main area where there's been mobilization on our campus, but I see it in the same light as essentially an attempt to prevent universities from fulfilling their function, which is to allow people to critically discuss problems in our world that we've got to be able to orient ourselves to. Students and faculty and staff are doing what a university should be doing, inviting speakers, in organizing film screenings, in teaching classes on difficult subjects. And I think that we just have to continue to organize in defense of that right. I guess the only other thing I'll say is just that it's I don't mean to deflect from the focus of the question on invited speakers. That's where Greg might be really well positioned to discuss this, because I know AAUP has policy on this. But maybe I'll just turn it over to Greg. I was going to say a few other things, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, I just put a link to our statement on academic freedom and outside speakers in the chat. So that statement's been around for a while, but it was just revised this fall. And I think you'll find that the principles it lays out are very helpful and can be used to take a principled stand against some of these incursions on academic freedom.
Greg, I have another question for you from the Q&A. Question reads, we're often asked to clearly indicate that we are not speaking for our institutions, but only as individuals. If we are introduced as a member of an institution, must we do this, or is it implicit?
Well, this has come up quite a bit over the years. There's some good language in some of our investigating committee reports on this, including most recently the Collin College investigating committee report. But it comes, by the way, from the 1940 statement. It's one of the admonitions in the section on academic freedom, the admonition that you must make clear that you're not speaking for the institution. But I think the questioner, I think it was David, it is right that it should be evident to anybody with a lick of common sense that a faculty member speaking at an event like this is not speaking on behalf of the institution. When do faculty members speak on behalf of the institution? I can't think of any examples. They don't typically play that role, at least not nowadays.
Let me ask a question that's I think implicit in several of the questions in the Q&A, which is the rights of non-faculty members on campus, of university staff, and I guess would extend it to graduate student workers, et cetera. And I'm particularly thinking, and several of the questioners have raised these attacks in a number of states on DEI, which have raised questions, and I know there are some genuine issues to be debated and reasonably discussed about what are the most effective forms of advancing DEI, and can it become too bureaucratized, et cetera. But we're seeing these things where large-scale layoffs in Texas of DEI staff, and so what are the speech rights of staff and of non-instructional employees, including student employees, et cetera, and what can faculty members at AAUP and AFT chapters do to defend those rights?
It's interesting. At Penn, as in the United States overall, the majority of faculty are non-tenure track, and many of them are actually classified as staff. They're classified as instructional support staff. So they're actually misclassified to begin with as not being faculty. So one of the big things that our chapter has tried to do is make clear that, first of all, academic freedom applies to everyone who does the work of research and teaching, whether they're tenure track or non-tenure track, graduate research and teaching assistants, and so on. So part of what we've tried to do is change people's understanding of who's a faculty member. And so we've addressed the issues of staff in that way by insisting that in many cases, first of all, that's a misclassification. There are for sure people on campus who would be classified as staff in that they're not doing research and teaching, but other kinds of roles. And I think that, my sense is that we need to be building the broadest possible solidarity, wall to wall, because some of the things that are under attack are, for instance, the right to assemble and speak. And it is important that everyone on the university campus be able to do that. That's part of, what a democratic society requires. And it is also part of the, process of learning that happens on university campuses. So I just approach it from that kind of perspective. When we think about DEI, I have to say that I think that the attacks on DEI are not primarily about those offices. They're really part and parcel of an attempt to roll back the broad gains of the civil rights movement, the Black freedom movement, and all of the social movements of the 1960s and 70s. So they're really primarily targeted, I think, at first of all, trying to destroy the fields of study that came out of those social movements, which have enriched our universities. And they're really targeting faculty, students, and staff who have gotten a toehold in the university, through the victories of social movements. And so I think that keeping the focus there is really what's most important.
I'll just say that the librarians within the University of California fought in their last they're currently bargaining their new contract right now, but their last contract campaign centered around the fight for academic freedom, which was a wake-up call for I would say, the whole UC system, to realize that they had not had academic freedom rights prior to that. And it was stunning how their own research at the time led them to basically systematically contact librarians around the country and other university systems about whether they had academic freedom, and how many librarians in colleges and universities are not given clear rights to academic freedom. So one suggestion I have is to start there. I think that the question of staff, as we're seeing here, is it can be very complex. But I think that at the very least, if your campus librarians don't have clear academic freedom rights, that's something that is could be easier in some ways to rally around if it's going to be a fight to win with administration, for example. As we learned during that campaign years ago, people were just stunned that, it seemed like a no-brainer, was what we heard over and over again, that librarians needed this. Academic in the University of California, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but our librarians are academic appointees. They may not have that designation in every college system. So it's a bit of apples and oranges when we're thinking about other types of staff. But I still think that it's worth, trying to sometimes move in the direction that we want to go. So if we're looking to seeing university staff and employees who may not be academic per se, being protected in these ways, we want to make sure that we're sweeping up, of course, all of those along the way that probably should have already had those rights.
And I'll just add to that, we're a private sector university. We're an advocacy chapter. We include librarians in our AAUP chapter. I completely agree with you. I think there's a lot of workers in the university who are involved in the work of research, teaching, and education, and they should all be absolutely party to academic freedom.
I want to, I'm not sure whether there's anybody here can really address this directly, but I think it's an important question. Somebody writes, I'm at an R2 in a town with a mostly defunct paper. In our state organizing against an anti-DEI law, we found that our AAUP chapter, the largest in the state, could not get our op-eds published or get the media to care about our perspective, while our colleagues at R1s had a much easier time, were solicited for their opinions. Can you offer some suggestions for those of us at smaller schools or R2s on how to organize and raise awareness when the media doesn't think our voices are worth hearing? So I'm wondering what I know both of you are at R1s, but Greg, I know, of course, has worked many times with people at R2s and smaller schools, and myself, I spent my career at a master's granting institution. So I'm wondering if, but I'll throw it to the panelists first.
Let me offer something really practical. If your campus can get involved in the National Day of Action, we have a national media team that is going to be having a press conference and trying to direct reporters to cover campuses that are participating. So if you'd like to have some help kind of shining a spotlight on what you're doing, get in touch. It would just mean, organizing some kind of an action on your campus on April 17th, and hopefully we can help to direct some press attention there.
I'd add that while I've personally come to have a real love-hate relationship with social media around organizing, if you're not having luck with media, using dedicated social media accounts for organizing can be a way to start to get some traction and the interest of media cover, and get some coverage. So that can be an avenue. It of course does not always work, and it can become problematic in its own way. But beyond that, I'm not quite sure. I would be interested in the specifics, and willing to brainstorm a little bit with whoever about this sort of thing. But it is challenging. I mean, I will say that in spite of being at the University of California, we often have a hard time getting the media interested in issues pertaining to our members. It's a really difficult time. The news is a very, very kind of wonky space. And to another question that's sort of in the chat that's related to this, I think that, when we do talk about these issues, how to message them, what kind of language to use, I increasingly do think that the broader our messaging can be, the better, because I do think that the media loves to pigeonhole, especially higher ed, as in the sort of classic ivory tower ways that separate our interests, our concerns, our needs from the greater good, and what the rest of the country and the public are experiencing. And I think that these are fairly high stakes and dangerous times for the kinds of erosion to academic freedom rights in particular to continue to happen, and what that's going to mean for access to education more broadly, even for citizens and students. So I think that how we message and how we talk about all of these issues is really vitally important right now. And those are the conversations we should be having.
Let me add something to that. I think one of the real problems we face is that much of the media, much of the whole national conversation, politicians, etc., it treats higher education as if there were like about a half a dozen schools in the whole country, and they're all like Harvard and Oberlin. That's basically it. And I think we have to struggle sometimes to broaden the discussion and to link the kinds of genuine issues that do arise on campuses like that, around questions like the Gaza war, et cetera, to a broad set of questions. One of the things I think is so great about April 17th, it tries to do that happen on campuses, even where there isn't a highly politicized debate about a particular national issue, but where the whole fate of higher education is really being resolved. And I want to add one practical thing is for those of you who are at campuses or at places, or just as individuals who feel you don't have an outlet, I'm one of the co-editors of the AAUP's Academe blog. There are several of us, and we are always open and looking for things to post on that blog. And it's a good place for a smaller AAUP chapter or AFT local to post something, just a little news report about something that happened on your campus, a statement that you made, or a petition that's being circulated, etc. And that goes out fairly broadly, and it's a good place to get started. And sometimes even I know some of my blog posts there have been picked up and republished in the Chronicle of Higher Education or elsewhere. So and you can contact me or contact AAUP, whatever. We're happy to do it. So I'm not sure. This is supposed to be budgeted for an hour, and I think we're now Gwen is putting out a chat thing saying thanks for participating. So I apologize to all those people whose questions we didn't get to. But these conversations aren't going to end, sadly. Thank you, everybody, for coming.